The candles had barely been lit when Evelyn felt her hands begin to shake. She stood near the tall windows of the ballroom, watching carriages arrive one after another, their lamps glowing like small floating stars in the dark. Music drifted from the string quartet in the corner, soft and cheerful, but Evelyn could not match its mood. Her chest felt tight. Something about tonight already felt wrong, though she could not say why. Her husband, Edmund, Duke of Camborne, had been away for nearly 3 weeks on business in the north. He had written to her only twice, short letters full of warmth but little detail. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A grand ball, held in their own home, meant to celebrate the end of the summer season. Evelyn had planned every detail herself. The flowers, the seating, the music. She had wanted it to be perfect for when Edmund returned. But there was one name on the guest list that she wished she could erase. Reginald Hale. She had not invited him. Her sister, Charlotte, had added his name without asking, believing it would be rude to leave out an old family friend. Evelyn had said nothing when she saw it, though her stomach had turned cold. She had hoped, foolishly, that he would not come. Now, standing by the window, she saw his carriage pull up outside. Margaret, her closest friend and companion, appeared at her side, noticing the sudden stiffness in Evelyn's shoulders. "You look pale," Margaret said gently. "Are you unwell?" "I am fine," Evelyn said, though her voice did not sound convincing even to herself. "You do not have to speak with him tonight," Margaret said quietly. "You are the lady of this house. He is merely a guest." Evelyn nodded, though the words did little to calm the unease building inside her. She had known Reginald long before she had known Edmund. Years ago, before her marriage, there had been an understanding between their families that she might one day become his wife. It had never been her wish. She had always found him charming on the surface, but something beneath his charm had made her uneasy, something she could never quite name. When she had instead married Edmund, a man she genuinely loved, Reginald had taken it as a personal insult. He had left the country for a time, and she had hoped, perhaps naively, that the matter was long settled. Seeing his name on tonight's list told her it was not. The ballroom filled quickly. Ladies in bright gowns and gentlemen in fine coats moved through the room, greeting each other with practiced smiles. Evelyn forced herself to be the gracious hostess everyone expected. She greeted guests, complimented their attire, laughed at small jokes, all while her eyes kept drifting toward the entrance, waiting. When Reginald finally entered, he looked different than she remembered. Thinner, perhaps, and paler, though his smile was the same practiced charm he had always worn like armor. He greeted several guests warmly, laughing loudly enough that heads turned. Evelyn hoped he would simply enjoy the evening and leave her alone. For the first hour he did. She danced with an elderly colonel who complimented her taste in music. She spoke with the vicar's wife about the upcoming harvest festival. She even managed a genuine laugh when Charlotte told her a silly story about a horse that had wandered into the kitchen garden that morning. For a while, Evelyn allowed herself to believe the evening might pass without incident. Then, near the hour when the musicians paused to rest, she noticed Reginald watching her from across the room. His expression had changed. The charming mask had slipped, just slightly, revealing something colder underneath. She turned away quickly, hoping he would not approach. He did anyway. "Lady Camborne," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something sharp. "You look well. Marriage suits you." "Thank you, Lord Hale," she replied politely, keeping her tone even. "I hope you are enjoying the evening." "I am enjoying it very much," he said, stepping slightly closer than was proper. "Though I confess, seeing you here, in this grand house, wearing the Duke's jewels, it brings back certain memories." Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. She glanced around, hoping to find an excuse to step away, but the crowd near them had thinned as guests moved toward the refreshment tables. "I should attend to my other guests," she said, beginning to turn. "Of course," Reginald said. Then, quieter, almost too quiet for anyone else to hear, he added, "Though I wonder if your husband knows how close we once were." The words struck her like cold water. She turned back to face him, her composure cracking slightly. "That was a long time ago, Reginald. It means nothing now." "Does it not?" His eyes had a strange glint to them, something between amusement and resentment. "I have thought of it often, how different things might have been. I would ask you not to speak of it again," Evelyn said firmly. though her voice trembled slightly at the edges. For a moment, he said nothing, simply studying her with an expression she could not read. Then he smiled again, the charming mask sliding back into place as though it had never slipped. "Forgive me," he said smoothly. "I have had too much wine, I think. Enjoy your evening, Lady Cambourne." He bowed slightly and walked away, disappearing into the crowd near the far doors. Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing herself to breathe evenly. She told herself it was nothing. Old bitterness, perhaps, mixed with too much wine, nothing more. He had walked away. The conversation was over. She did not yet know that it was only beginning. Across the room, unseen by anyone, a side door near the servants' passage creaked open just slightly. A tall figure in a traveling coat stepped quietly into the shadows near the entrance hall, having arrived earlier than expected, wishing to surprise his wife by watching her shine at her own grand ball before revealing himself. He had no idea what he had just walked into. Margaret found Evelyn a few minutes later, still standing near the window, her fingers twisting the edge of her glove. "What did he say to you?" Margaret asked, her voice low with concern. "Nothing important," Evelyn said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Evelyn," Margaret said gently, "you can tell me." Evelyn hesitated, glancing toward the doors where Reginald had disappeared. "He mentioned the past, our families, the old arrangement. I do not think he has truly let it go, even after all these years." Margaret's expression darkened slightly. "Perhaps you should ask him to leave." "On what grounds?" Evelyn asked. "That he spoke to me of old memories? People would think it strange to send away a guest for such a small thing. I do not wish to cause a scene, especially not tonight." Margaret did not look convinced, but she nodded, respecting her friend's wishes. "Just be careful," she said. "Men like him do not always accept being told no." Evelyn managed a small smile, though it did not reach her eyes. "I will be careful. Now, come, help me smile for the rest of these guests. I promised Edmund a wonderful ball to return home to." The two women returned to the crowd, and for a while, the evening continued much as before. The music resumed. Guests laughed and danced. Evelyn moved from conversation to conversation, doing her best to push the unsettling exchange from her mind. But every so often, she caught sight of Reginald near the edges of the room, his eyes following her even as he spoke with other guests. Each time their gazes met, she looked away quickly, a small chill running through her. She did not know that time was slowly running out, before the night would take a turn no one at that ball could have predicted, least of all her. Near midnight, when the dancing paused for refreshments, Evelyn slipped away from the main hall, seeking a moment of quiet in the corridor that led toward the private study. She needed a few minutes to steady her nerves, away from the noise and the watching eyes. She did not notice the footsteps following her until it was too late. "Lady Cambourne," came Reginald's voice from behind her, closer than she expected. Evelyn turned quickly, startled. "Lord Hale, I did not realize you were behind me." "I saw you leave the hall," he said, stepping closer. "I thought perhaps we might speak more privately, away from prying eyes." "There is nothing further to discuss," Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady, despite the unease building in her chest. "I must return to my guests." "Just a moment," he said, his tone shifting, the charm draining away to reveal something harder beneath. "You owe me that much, at least." "I owe you nothing," Evelyn said firmly, taking a step back. "Please, step aside." His jaw tightened, and for the first time that evening, Evelyn saw real anger flash across his face, unmasked and unmistakable. "You ruined everything," he said, his voice low and bitter. "Do you understand that? I had plans, a future, and you chose him instead, without so much as a proper explanation." "I never owed you an explanation," Evelyn said, though her voice trembled slightly now. "I made my choice, and it was mine to make." "Your choice," he repeated, almost spitting the words. "Your choice cost me everything I had worked for." Evelyn's heart raced. She glanced toward the end of the corridor, calculating how quickly she could walk away, back toward the safety of the crowded ballroom. "I am going back to my guests," she said, turning sharply. But he caught her arm, not gently. "Let go of me," Evelyn said, her voice rising with alarm. You will listen to me, Reginald said, his grip tightening. Evelyn tried to pull free, panic rising in her chest. But before she could call out, everything happened too quickly to stop. And unseen at the far end of the corridor, near the doorway leading back into the ballroom, a tall figure in a traveling coat had gone very still, watching the scene unfold with growing horror, his hand tightening slowly around the doorframe. The corridor was narrow, lit only by a single lamp on the wall, and the sound of the distant music seemed to fade into nothing as Evelyn struggled against Reginald's grip. Her breath came in short, frightened gasps. She had never seen him like this before, his face twisted with a bitterness that had clearly been building for years, waiting for a moment to break free. "Please," she said, her voice shaking now. "Let go of my arm. You are hurting me." "You never once considered how I felt," Reginald said, his voice low and trembling with anger. "Not once, in all these years." "This is not the place," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her fear. "Whatever quarrel you have with me, it does not belong here, tonight, in my own home." "Your home," he repeated bitterly. "Everything you have, everything you are, it should have been mine to share." Before she could respond, his hand rose, and in one swift, terrible motion, the back of his hand struck her cheek. The sound was sharp in the quiet corridor, and Evelyn stumbled backward, catching herself against the wall, her hand flying to her face in shock. For a moment, neither of them moved. The music from the ballroom continued, unaware, as though nothing at all had happened. Evelyn stared at him, stunned into silence, her cheek stinging, her mind struggling to understand what had just occurred. Reginald himself seemed frozen, as though even he could not quite believe what he had done. His hand hovered in the air a moment longer before falling back to his side. Neither of them noticed the tall figure now stepping fully into the corridor, from the shadowed doorway at its far end. Edmund had arrived home only an hour earlier, wishing to surprise his wife by slipping quietly into the ballroom and watching her from a distance, before revealing his return. He had stood near the servants' passage, smiling to himself as he watched Evelyn move gracefully among her guests, exactly as he had imagined during his long weeks away. He had planned to wait until the dancing resumed, then step forward and take her hand for the next dance, delighting in her surprise. He had not expected to see her slip away toward the private study, nor to see Reginald Hale follow her moments later. Something in the way Reginald moved, quick and purposeful, had made Edmund uneasy enough to follow at a distance himself, staying just out of sight. What he witnessed in the corridor stopped his heart cold. For a moment, disbelief held him frozen in place. Surely, he told himself, surely he had not just seen what he thought he had seen. But Evelyn's hand pressed against her reddened cheek. Her wide, frightened eyes told him everything he needed to know. A terrible stillness settled over him, more dangerous than any shout could have been. When he finally stepped forward, his footsteps were slow and deliberate, echoing faintly against the stone floor. "Reginald," Edmund said, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight that made both Evelyn and Reginald turn sharply toward him. Reginald's face drained of color the instant he saw the Duke standing there. "Your Grace," he stammered, "this is not what it appears." "I saw exactly what it appeared to be," Edmund said, his voice still frighteningly calm. "I watched you raise your hand against my wife in my own home." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Edmund," she whispered, relief and shame mixing painfully in her chest. She had not wanted him to see this, had not wanted him to know how close Reginald's old bitterness had come to spilling over into something so ugly. Edmund did not look at her yet. His eyes remained fixed on Reginald, cold and unwavering. "Explain yourself," he said, "now." Reginald's composure crumbled rapidly under the weight of that stare. "It was a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "Old feelings, nothing more. I never intended." "You intended exactly what you did," Edmund said, cutting him off. "I saw your hand move. There is no misunderstanding a thing so clear." The corridor felt smaller with every passing second, the distant music from the ballroom now feeling impossibly far away, as though the three of them existed in some entirely separate world, one built entirely of tension and consequence. "Your Grace," Reginald tried again, his voice losing its earlier confidence entirely. "Surely we can resolve this quietly, without causing a scene among your guests." "You struck my wife," Edmund said, each word measured and precise. and you speak to me of avoiding a scene." Evelyn, still shaken, found her voice at last. "Edmund, please, do not do anything you might regret in anger." At this, Edmund's expression softened, just slightly, as he finally turned his gaze to her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler now, though still tight, with barely restrained fury. "I will be well," Evelyn said, though her voice trembled. "Please, Edmund, think of what this could mean, if it becomes known publicly." "It will become known," Edmund said firmly. "Not through scandal or gossip, but through truth, spoken plainly, so that everyone understands exactly what kind of man stood beneath my roof tonight." Reginald's face had gone pale as parchment. "Your Grace, I beg you to reconsider. My family's name, my position. You should have considered such things before you raised your hand against a woman," Edmund said, his voice hard as stone. "Especially my wife." For a long moment, no one spoke. The lamp on the wall flickered slightly, casting shifting shadows across the narrow corridor. Evelyn watched her husband, seeing in his eyes a fury she had never witnessed before, controlled entirely by sheer will, though clearly costing him great effort to contain. Finally, Edmund straightened his shoulders and spoke again, his voice carrying the authority of his title fully now. "You will follow me back into the ballroom, Lord Hale. You will stand before our guests, and you will explain your actions honestly. If you refuse, I will have no choice but to summon the magistrate this very night." Reginald's eyes widened in alarm. "Your Grace, surely there is no need for such extreme measures." "There is every need," Edmund said. "A man who strikes a woman in anger deserves no protection from consequence, whatever his name or standing might be." Evelyn stepped forward slightly, still trembling, but finding new steadiness in her husband's presence beside her. "Edmund," she said quietly, "whatever you decide, I trust your judgment." He turned to her fully then, his expression finally breaking from its cold fury into something warmer, though still edged with concern. "You should not have had to face this alone," he said softly. "I am only grateful I arrived when I did." "I did not know you had returned," Evelyn said, her voice catching slightly with emotion. "I did not know you were even here." "I wish to surprise you," Edmund said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips despite the tension of the moment. "I did not imagine the evening would unfold this way." Reginald, sensing the shift in attention away from himself, attempted to step back toward the shadows of the corridor, hoping perhaps to slip away unnoticed, but Edmund's voice stopped him instantly. "Do not think of leaving," Edmund said, his tone once again hardening. "You will face what you have done, tonight, before everyone present." Reginald froze, realizing there would be no escape from the consequences now unfolding around him. Evelyn watched her husband closely, seeing the careful control he maintained even now, refusing to let raw anger dictate his actions, choosing instead a path of measured justice. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of man she had chosen all those years ago instead of Reginald, a man who valued honor and restraint over impulsive fury. "Come," Edmund said finally, turning toward the ballroom entrance, his hand extending toward Evelyn. "Let us finish this properly, before our guests, so there can be no doubt of what has occurred here tonight." Evelyn took his offered hand, grateful for its steady warmth despite everything that had just happened. Together, they walked toward the doorway, Reginald following reluctantly behind them, his earlier confidence entirely gone, replaced now by a dawning dread of what awaited him inside. As they approached the entrance, the music and laughter from the ballroom grew louder, utterly unaware of the storm quietly building just beyond its doors, a storm that was about to change everything, for everyone gathered there that night. The moment the three of them stepped through the doorway into the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Guests nearest the entrance noticed first, their conversations trailing off as they took in the sight before them. The Duke of Camborne, freshly returned and still dressed in his traveling coat, stood tall and composed, though something in his expression made even the boldest guests fall silent. Beside him, Evelyn walked with careful dignity, though the faint redness on her cheek did not escape notice. Behind them both, Reginald Hale followed with none of his earlier charm, his face pale and his eyes downcast. Word spread quickly through the room, whispered from guest to guest, though no one yet understood exactly what had happened. The musicians, sensing the sudden shift in mood, allowed their final notes to fade into silence, and within moments, the entire ballroom had turned its attention toward the small group standing near the entrance. Charlotte, Evelyn's sister, pushed through the crowd quickly, alarm written across her face. Evelyn, what has happened? Edmund, you have returned early, but why does everyone look so— Charlotte, Edmund said calmly, though his voice carried clearly across the now silent room. Please, gather everyone's attention. There is something that must be said tonight, before we continue with the evening's festivities. Charlotte, sensing the seriousness in his tone, nodded and stepped back, allowing him room to address the gathered guests directly. Edmund turned to face the crowd, his hand still resting protectively near Evelyn's arm. Friends, he began, his voice steady, despite the anger still simmering beneath the surface. I apologize for interrupting such a joyful evening, with matters far less pleasant. However, I believe honesty owed to all of you outweighs any discomfort this might cause. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, curious and uncertain. Evelyn stood beside him, her chin held high despite her lingering shame, determined not to appear weak before the very guests she had welcomed into her home only hours earlier. Only moments ago, Edmund continued, I witnessed Lord Reginald Hale strike my wife across the face, here, within the walls of our own home, during what was meant to be a celebration among friends and family. A collective gasp swept through the room. Heads turned sharply toward Reginald, who stood frozen near the doorway, his earlier composure entirely shattered under the weight of every gaze now fixed upon him. Your Grace, Reginald began, his voice trembling, I assure you, this has been greatly misunderstood. There is no misunderstanding, Edmund interrupted firmly. I saw it with my own eyes. My wife's reddened cheek confirms it plainly enough for anyone here to see. Evelyn felt every eye in the room shift toward her, and though shame threatened to overwhelm her, she forced herself to stand tall, refusing to shrink beneath their collective gaze. Margaret appeared quickly at her side, offering silent support through her presence alone. Lord Hale, Edmund continued, turning his full attention back toward Reginald, you will explain to everyone gathered here exactly what led you to such an act, and you will do so honestly, without further attempts at deception. Reginald's face had gone entirely pale now, sweat beading faintly at his brow despite the coolness of the evening. He glanced desperately around the room, searching perhaps for some ally, some sympathetic face among the crowd, but found none. Even those who had laughed at his jokes earlier that evening now regarded him with open suspicion and disgust. He began, faltering. I had spoken with Lady Cambourne regarding matters from our shared past. Old feelings, long unresolved, resurfaced unexpectedly, and in a moment of poor judgment, You raised your hand against her, Edmund finished for him, his voice hard as iron. There is no gentler way to describe such an act, regardless of whatever old feelings you claim resurfaced. Reginald's shoulders sagged under the weight of the accusation laid bare before everyone. Your Grace, he said quietly, I understand the gravity of what I have done. I offer no excuse, only my deepest apologies, though I know they cannot undo what has occurred. Apologies offered only after being caught mean little, Edmund said. Had I not arrived when I did, would you have offered such remorse at all, or would you have simply returned to the festivities as though nothing had happened? Reginald had no answer for this, his silence speaking volumes to everyone present. An elderly gentleman near the front of the crowd, a respected magistrate known to many in attendance, stepped forward slowly. Your Grace, he said, addressing Edmund directly, if what you describe is accurate, this matter cannot simply end with words spoken here tonight, however deserved they may be. I agree entirely, Edmund said. I intend to see this matter handled properly, through whatever legal means are appropriate, ensuring Lord Hale faces the full consequences of his actions. Reginald's eyes widened in alarm. Your Grace, surely there is room for leniency, given my family's long history of friendship with yours. Friendship does not excuse violence, Edmund said firmly, nor does family history grant permission to harm another person without consequence. Evelyn, finding her voice at last amid the tension, stepped forward slightly, addressing the crowd directly for the first time. I did not wish for this evening to end this way, she said, her voice steady despite everything. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that old matters could remain buried in the past, unspoken and forgotten. I see now that silence would have only allowed such behavior to continue unchecked, perhaps toward others in the future. Her words seemed to resonate through the crowd, several guests nodding in quiet agreement. their earlier shock softening slightly into something closer to respect for her courage in speaking openly. Charlotte moved to stand beside her sister, taking her hand firmly. "You have done nothing wrong, Evelyn," she said. "Whatever happened tonight, the fault lies entirely with him, not with you." Margaret nodded in agreement, and slowly, other guests began voicing similar sentiments, their earlier silence giving way to murmured support for Evelyn and quiet condemnation of Reginald's actions. Reginald, sensing the crowd's mood turning firmly against him, made one final desperate attempt at defense. "Your Grace, Lady Cambourne, I beg you both to consider the consequences such a public matter might bring upon all our families, mine included in this very room." "You should have considered such consequences before raising your hand," Edmund said coldly. "It is far too late now to plead for mercy. You were unwilling to extend to my wife only moments ago." The magistrate stepped forward again, his expression grave. "Your Grace, with your permission, I will see to it that proper legal proceedings begin promptly. Given the number of witnesses present tonight, there should be little difficulty establishing the truth of what occurred." "Thank you," Edmund said, nodding respectfully toward the older man. "I would appreciate your assistance in ensuring this matter receives the attention it deserves." Reginald, realizing finally that no amount of pleading would change the outcome now unfolding around him, fell silent, his earlier arrogance replaced entirely by quiet, resigned despair. Two footmen, summoned quietly by Edmund's earlier signal, appeared at the ballroom entrance, ready to escort Reginald from the premises until further arrangements could be made regarding the legal proceedings ahead. "Take Lord Hale to the study," Edmund instructed calmly. "He will remain there under watch until the magistrate's men arrive to handle the matter properly." Reginald offered no resistance as the footman approached him, his earlier bravado entirely drained away. He cast one final glance toward Evelyn, his expression unreadable, before allowing himself to be led quietly from the ballroom, the weight of his actions finally settling fully upon him. As the doors closed behind him, a heavy silence lingered briefly over the gathered guests before Edmund turned once more to address them all. "I apologize again for this interruption," he said, his voice softening slightly now that the immediate confrontation had passed. "I know this was not the evening any of us anticipated. However, I believe truth, however uncomfortable, always serves us better than silence." Several guests nodded in agreement, murmuring quiet words of support toward both Edmund and Evelyn. Slowly, cautiously, conversations began to resume throughout the room, though the earlier joyful atmosphere had been replaced by something more subdued and reflective. Edmund turned finally to Evelyn, his expression softening entirely now, as he took both her hands gently in his own. "Are you truly well?" he asked quietly, away from the ears of the surrounding guests. "I am shaken," Evelyn admitted honestly, "but I am safe now, thanks to you." "I should have arrived sooner," Edmund said, guilt flickering briefly across his features. "Perhaps then none of this would have happened at all." "You arrived exactly when you needed to," Evelyn said gently. "I do not know what might have happened had you not been there." Margaret, standing nearby, offered a small, reassuring smile toward them both. "Perhaps," she suggested gently, "it might be best to retire from the festivities early tonight. Allow yourselves time to recover from everything that has occurred." Edmund nodded in agreement, glancing toward Evelyn for confirmation. "Would you prefer that?" he asked softly. "Yes," Evelyn admitted. "I believe I would." Together, they made their way quietly through the remaining guests, accepting brief words of concern and support along the way, before finally retreating toward the privacy of their own chambers, leaving the ballroom and its lingering tension behind them for the night. Yet even as they left, whispers continued throughout the room, guests discussing quietly amongst themselves the shocking events they had just witnessed, none of them fully aware that the true resolution of this matter had only just begun, with far more still to unfold in the days ahead. The private chambers were quiet when Evelyn and Edmund finally arrived, the noise of the ballroom fading behind them, until only the soft crackle of the fireplace remained. Evelyn sat slowly on the edge of the bed, her hands still trembling faintly, as the events of the evening replayed in her mind. Edmund knelt before her, taking her hands gently in his own, studying her face with quiet concern. "Let me look at you properly," he said softly. She lifted her chin slightly, allowing him to examine the faint mark still visible on her cheek. His jaw tightened at the sight of it, though he said nothing further, simply reaching for a small cloth soaked in cool water from the basin nearby and pressing it gently against her skin. "I am sorry you had to witness that," Evelyn said quietly. "I never wanted you to see me that way." "Do not apologize," Edmund said firmly, though his voice remained gentle. "You did nothing wrong tonight. The fault lies entirely with him." "I knew he still harbored resentment," Evelyn admitted, her voice growing quieter still. "I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that time would have softened it. When I saw his name on the guest list, I felt a warning within myself, yet I said nothing, not even to you." "Why did you not tell me?" Edmund asked, his tone free of accusation, though genuine curiosity colored his words. Evelyn hesitated, glancing down at her hands. "I did not wish to trouble you while you were away on business. I thought I could manage the situation myself, avoid him throughout the evening, and everything would pass without incident." "You should never feel you must carry such burdens alone," Edmund said, his voice softening further. "Whatever concerns you, whatever frightens you, I wish for you to share it with me. Always." Evelyn looked up at him, tears finally beginning to gather at the corners of her eyes. "I feared you might think less of me, knowing there had once been an arrangement between our families, however unwanted it was on my part. I would never think less of you for choices made before we ever met," Edmund said firmly. "You chose me, Evelyn, freely and completely. Nothing from your past changes that truth." She allowed herself a small, watery smile at his words, some of the tension finally beginning to ease from her shoulders. "I am grateful for you," she said quietly. "More than words can properly express." "As I am grateful for you," Edmund replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Though I confess, my anger tonight surprised even myself. I have never felt such fury before, not in all my years." "You remained remarkably composed," Evelyn said, "despite everything." "It required great effort," Edmund admitted honestly. "Every part of me wished to react far more harshly in that corridor. Yet I knew such actions would serve neither justice nor your dignity properly. I wanted him held accountable clearly, before witnesses, rather than through impulsive anger alone." Evelyn studied her husband's face carefully, seeing clearly now the depth of restraint he had shown throughout the evening's difficult events. "You handled it exactly as it needed to be handled," she said softly. "I am proud of the man you are." They sat together quietly for a long moment, the warmth of the fireplace filling the room with a comforting glow. Slowly, Evelyn felt the earlier fear and shame beginning to loosen their grip upon her, replaced gradually by a growing sense of safety in her husband's steady presence beside her. "What will happen now?" she asked eventually. "Regarding Reginald, I mean." "The magistrate will handle matters properly," Edmund said. "Given the number of witnesses present tonight, there should be little difficulty in establishing the truth clearly. I intend to see that he faces full consequences for his actions, both legally and socially. His family will suffer as well," Evelyn said quietly, a flicker of sympathy crossing her features despite everything. "His mother, his sisters, they had no part in tonight's events." "That is unfortunate," Edmund said, "though the responsibility for such consequences rests entirely with Reginald himself. Had he restrained his anger, none of this would touch his family at all." Evelyn nodded slowly, understanding the truth in his words, even as she felt a quiet sadness for those who would suffer indirectly from Reginald's actions. A soft knock sounded at the door, and Margaret's voice called quietly from the hallway. "Evelyn, may I come in? I wish to check on you before retiring for the evening." Edmund rose and opened the door, allowing Margaret entry. She carried a small tray with tea and a plate of light refreshments, setting it carefully on the table nearby. "I thought you might need something warm, after everything tonight," Margaret said gently. "Thank you," Evelyn said, offering her friend a grateful smile. "You have been wonderful throughout this entire evening." "You would do the same for me," Margaret replied simply. "How are you feeling now?" "Better," Evelyn admitted, glancing toward Edmund. "Much better, thanks to my husband's care." Margaret smiled warmly at them both, before excusing herself quietly, leaving them once again to their privacy. Edmund poured the tea carefully, handing a cup to Evelyn, before settling beside her on the small settee near the fireplace. "You should rest properly tonight," he said. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, dealing with the aftermath of everything that occurred." "Will you stay with me?" Evelyn asked quietly, a note of vulnerability entering her voice that she rarely allowed herself to show. "Always," Edmund said simply. wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. "I do not intend to leave your side again, anytime soon." Evelyn leaned into him, finally allowing herself to relax fully, for the first time since the ordeal had begun. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of her husband's presence, slowly eased the last remnants of fear still lingering within her chest. "I keep thinking," she said softly after a long silence, "how different tonight might have ended, had you not returned early, had you not witnessed what happened in that corridor." "But I did return," Edmund said firmly, "and I did witness it. There is no use dwelling on what might have been, only on what we do now, moving forward together." "You are right," Evelyn agreed, though a small shiver still passed through her at the thought. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, sipping their tea slowly as the fire crackled softly nearby. Gradually, exhaustion began to overtake them both, the emotional weight of the evening finally demanding its due. "Come," Edmund said eventually, rising and offering his hand to help her up from the settee. "Let us rest properly now. Tomorrow, we will face whatever comes next together, as we always have." Evelyn took his hand gratefully, allowing him to guide her toward the bed. As she settled beneath the covers, Edmund extinguished the remaining candles, leaving only the soft glow of the fireplace to illuminate the room. He climbed in beside her, pulling her gently against him, and for the first time since the terrible moment in that narrow corridor, Evelyn felt truly safe once more. "Sleep now," Edmund murmured softly against her hair. "I am here, and I am not going anywhere." Evelyn closed her eyes, finally allowing sleep to claim her, comforted entirely by the steady rhythm of her husband's breathing beside her, and the quiet certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would not face them alone. Outside their chambers, the household had grown quiet at last, the earlier chaos of the evening settling gradually into an uneasy stillness, though within the walls of the study below, Reginald Hale remained under careful watch, awaiting whatever consequences the coming days would bring for the terrible choice he had made that night. Morning arrived with a pale gray light spreading slowly across the estate, and with it came the reality of everything that had unfolded the previous night. Evelyn woke to find Edmund already dressed, standing near the window, reading a note that had apparently arrived early from the magistrate's office. "What does it say?" Evelyn asked, sitting up slowly. "The magistrate's men arrived before dawn to formally take Reginald into custody," Edmund said, his expression grave. "However, there is a complication." Evelyn's stomach tightened with unease. "What kind of complication?" "It seems Reginald attempted to leave the estate during the night, before the magistrate's men arrived," Edmund said. "One of the footmen noticed movement near the stables and managed to stop him before he could take a horse and flee entirely." "He tried to escape," Evelyn said, disbelief coloring her voice. "After everything, he thought he could simply run from the consequences of his actions?" "It seems so," Edmund said grimly. "Fortunately, our staff acted quickly and prevented him from getting far. He remains under guard in the study, awaiting proper transport to face the magistrate formally." Evelyn rose quickly, dressing with Margaret's assistance, her mind racing with questions about what the coming hours would bring. When she finally made her way downstairs, she found the household unusually tense, servants moving quietly through their duties, casting occasional worried glances toward the closed study door. Edmund met her in the main hall, his expression softening slightly at the sight of her. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked gently. "Anxious," Evelyn admitted honestly, "though better than I expected, given everything." "The magistrate himself will arrive within the hour to formally record what occurred," Edmund said. "He will wish to speak with both of us, along with any other witnesses present last night." Evelyn nodded, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Though the confrontation in the ballroom had already exposed Reginald's actions publicly, she understood that formal legal proceedings would require reliving the events once more, in careful, precise detail. Within the hour, the magistrate arrived, accompanied by 2 assistants who began setting up in the drawing room to record statements from those involved. Evelyn watched nervously as Edmund entered first, providing his account clearly and calmly, describing exactly what he had witnessed in the corridor the previous night. When it came her turn, Evelyn took a steadying breath before entering the drawing room herself. The magistrate, an older gentleman with kind but serious eyes, gestured for her to sit. "Lady Cambourne," he said gently, I understand this may be difficult to discuss again, but I must ask you to describe, as clearly as you are able, exactly what transpired last night in the corridor." Evelyn nodded, gathering her composure before speaking. "Lord Hale followed me from the ballroom," she began, "insisting we speak privately, regarding matters from our past. When I refused, and attempted to return to my guests, he grasped my arm, and would not release me. Words were exchanged, and in a moment of anger he struck me. Had Lord Hale shown any signs of aggression toward you prior to this incident?" the magistrate asked, his quill moving steadily across his paper as he recorded her words. "Earlier in the evening," Evelyn said, "he approached me with remarks about our shared past, remarks that made me uncomfortable, though nothing outwardly threatening at that time. It was only later, in the corridor, that his manner changed entirely." The magistrate nodded, continuing to record her statement carefully. "Thank you, Lady Cambourne. Your account aligns closely with the Duke's own testimony, as well as with several other guests who witnessed portions of the confrontation before you returned to the ballroom." Margaret was called next, followed by Charlotte, and even the elderly colonel who had danced with Evelyn earlier that evening, each providing accounts that further confirmed the sequence of events. By midday, the magistrate had gathered sufficient testimony to proceed formally with charges against Reginald. Given the severity of the incident, and the number of consistent witness accounts, the magistrate explained to Edmund and Evelyn privately afterward, "I believe there will be little difficulty securing a conviction. However, I must ask, given Lord Hale's attempted escape this morning, whether either of you have concerns regarding his continued detention until the matter is fully resolved. I would feel considerably safer knowing he remains in custody," Evelyn admitted honestly, "particularly given his actions this morning, which suggest he does not intend to face this matter honestly." "I agree entirely," Edmund said firmly. "I would ask that additional precautions be taken to prevent any further attempts at escape before formal proceedings can be completed." The magistrate nodded in agreement. "I will ensure additional guards accompany him during transport, and that he remains securely held until the matter can be properly settled through formal legal channels." As the magistrate prepared to leave, taking Reginald with him under heavy guard, Evelyn found herself watching from the drawing-room window as he was led toward the waiting carriage. Reginald's earlier defiance seemed entirely gone now, replaced by a hollow, defeated expression as he glanced briefly back toward the house before being guided into the carriage. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Evelyn felt an unexpected pang of something she could not quite name. Not sympathy exactly, but perhaps a quiet sadness at how far things had fallen between them, from whatever friendship might once have existed in their youth. Edmund appeared beside her, following her gaze toward the departing carriage. "Are you troubled?" he asked gently. "A little," Evelyn admitted. "Not for his sake entirely, but for what this will mean for his family, and perhaps even for the person he once was, before bitterness consumed him so completely. It is a kind heart that feels such sadness, even for those who have wronged us," Edmund said softly, "though I would ask you not to let it burden you unnecessarily. He alone chose his actions last night." "I know," Evelyn said quietly. "I simply cannot help but wonder how things might have been different had circumstances unfolded another way entirely." They watched together as the carriage finally pulled away down the long drive, disappearing eventually beyond the distant trees. The household slowly began returning to some semblance of normalcy throughout the remainder of the day, though an undeniable tension lingered in the air, a reminder of how quickly a joyful celebration had transformed into something far more serious. That afternoon, as Evelyn sat quietly in the garden attempting to steady her thoughts, Charlotte approached, settling beside her on the stone bench. "How are you truly feeling, sister?" Charlotte asked gently. "Overwhelmed," Evelyn admitted. "Though grateful, more than I can properly express, for Edmund's presence throughout everything." "I still cannot quite believe what happened," Charlotte said, shaking her head slowly. "I invited Reginald myself, never imagining such a thing possible. I feel partly responsible for what occurred." "You could not have known," Evelyn said gently, reaching for her sister's hand. "None of us could have predicted such a thing, least of all myself, though I confess I felt uneasy the moment I saw his name on the guest list." "Why did you not simply tell me to remove him?" Charlotte asked. "I did not wish to seem unreasonable," Evelyn admitted. "It felt improper to exclude an old family friend without clear justification. I see now how foolish that reasoning truly was. Charlotte squeezed her sister's hand gently. You are the least foolish person I know, Evelyn. Whatever happened last night, the blame rests entirely with him, not with any of us. They sat together quietly for a while longer, the afternoon sun casting warm light across the garden, offering a small measure of peace amid the lingering unease from the previous night's events. Yet even as the immediate danger seemed to have passed, with Reginald now securely in custody, Evelyn could not entirely shake the feeling that this matter was far from truly finished, that further challenges likely still awaited them in the days ahead as formal proceedings began in earnest. Little did she know just how complicated matters were about to become, as word of the scandal began spreading rapidly beyond their estate, reaching ears far and wide throughout the surrounding countryside, threatening to draw even more attention toward a family already burdened enough by recent events. Within days, news of the incident had spread far beyond the boundaries of the estate, carried through the countryside by servants, guests, and eager gossips alike. Evelyn found herself the subject of hushed conversations wherever she went, some sympathetic, others less kind, questioning what she might have done to provoke such an incident in the first place. Pay no attention to such talk, Edmund told her firmly one morning, noticing the tightness in her expression after returning from a brief visit to the village. Those who truly know you understand the truth of what occurred. It is difficult, Evelyn admitted, knowing strangers whisper about something so personal, twisting it into whatever version suits their curiosity best. The formal proceedings will settle the truth clearly enough, Edmund reassured her. Once the matter reaches court, there will be little room left for false rumors to persist. The trial date arrived sooner than expected, the magistrate moving swiftly given the clarity of evidence and the number of consistent witness accounts already gathered. Evelyn dressed carefully that morning, Margaret helping her prepare with steady, reassuring hands. You need only speak the truth, Margaret reminded her gently. Nothing more is required of you today. I know, Evelyn said, though nervousness still fluttered within her chest as she prepared to face Reginald again, this time within the formal setting of the courtroom. The courthouse was crowded when they arrived, curious onlookers filling the benches, eager to witness firsthand the resolution of a scandal that had captured the attention of the entire county. Edmund walked beside Evelyn protectively as they entered, his presence offering steady reassurance amid the sea of watching eyes. Reginald sat near the front of the room, flanked by two guards, his appearance noticeably different from the confident guest who had attended the ball only days earlier. His clothing was simple now, his posture slumped, though as Evelyn passed, she noticed a flicker of something calculating in his eyes, quickly hidden away. The proceedings began formally, with the magistrate presiding, as witnesses were called one by one to provide their accounts. Edmund testified first, his account clear, measured and unwavering, describing precisely what he had witnessed in the corridor that night. When Evelyn was called to testify, she rose carefully, walking to the front of the room with as much composure as she could gather. She repeated her account clearly, refusing to let her voice waver despite the weight of so many watching eyes upon her. Reginald's lawyer, a sharp-featured man with a calculating demeanor, rose to question her once her initial statement concluded. Lady Cambourne, he began smoothly, is it not true that you and my client shared a close relationship in your youth, one that ended under circumstances that might have left him understandably distressed? We were acquainted through our families, Evelyn replied carefully, though I never encouraged any expectation beyond simple friendship. Yet an arrangement existed between your families at one time, did it not? The lawyer pressed. One that you personally chose to reject? I made my choice freely, as was my right, Evelyn said firmly, refusing to let the question rattle her composure. Whatever expectations existed, they were never mine to fulfill against my own wishes. And is it not possible, the lawyer continued, his tone growing sharper, that your rejection, combined with recent provocative remarks on your part, contributed to my client's emotional state that evening? A murmur rippled through the courtroom at this suggestion, and Evelyn felt a flash of indignation rise within her. I made no provocative remarks, she said clearly, her voice carrying firmly across the room. I asked him repeatedly to release my arm and allow me to return to my guests. His response to that request was to strike me. Nothing I said or did justified such an action. The magistrate nodded slightly, seemingly satisfied with her firm response, while the lawyer, sensing his line of questioning gaining little traction, shifted his approach. Let the record show, he said instead, that my client has expressed deep remorse for his actions, and that this was, by all accounts, an isolated incident born from long-standing emotional distress rather than any pattern of behavior. That may be so, the magistrate interjected calmly. However, remorse expressed after the fact does not diminish the severity of the act itself, nor does emotional distress excuse violence against another person. Several witnesses followed Evelyn's testimony, each confirming details that further solidified the clear sequence of events from that night. Charlotte spoke of Reginald's earlier interactions with Evelyn throughout the evening, describing subtle warning signs she had noticed even before the confrontation occurred. Margaret detailed Evelyn's evident distress following her initial conversation with Reginald, long before the physical altercation itself. By the time all witnesses had been heard, the evidence against Reginald stood overwhelming and largely uncontested. The magistrate called for a brief recess before delivering his final judgment, and the courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation during the pause. "How do you feel it is proceeding?" Evelyn asked Edmund quietly during the recess, seeking reassurance despite already sensing the clear direction of the trial. "The evidence speaks clearly for itself," Edmund said gently. "I believe justice will be served properly today." When the magistrate returned to deliver his judgment, the room fell into complete silence, every eye fixed upon him as he prepared to speak. Having carefully considered all testimony and evidence presented today, the magistrate began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "I find the account provided by Lady Cambourne, the Duke of Cambourne, and all supporting witnesses, to be consistent, credible, and entirely convincing." Reginald's face paled visibly as the magistrate continued. "Lord Reginald Hale," the magistrate said firmly, "you are hereby found guilty of assault against Lady Evelyn Cambourne, an act made all the more serious given its occurrence within a private residence, before numerous witnesses, and further compounded by your subsequent attempt to evade proper legal consequence through flight." A ripple of reaction passed through the crowded courtroom, though the magistrate raised his hand slightly, calling for continued silence as he delivered the remainder of his judgment. "Given the severity and public nature of this offense," he continued, "you are sentenced to immediate loss of standing within polite society, formal censure recorded permanently within county records, and a substantial fine to be paid directly toward Lady Cambourne as recompense for the harm caused. Additionally, given your attempted flight from justice, you shall remain under strict supervision for a period of no less than 1 year, ensuring compliance with all conditions set forth by this court." Reginald sat motionless as the judgment was delivered, his earlier calculating expression finally giving way to genuine despair as the full weight of the consequences settled upon him. His lawyer offered a few quiet words beside him, though Reginald seemed barely to register them, his gaze fixed instead on some distant point, as though only now truly comprehending the extent of what his actions that night had cost him. Evelyn watched him from across the courtroom, feeling a complicated mixture of relief and lingering sadness. Justice had been served, clearly and properly, yet she could not entirely dismiss the quiet sorrow she felt at witnessing someone she had once considered, however briefly, a friend, brought so low by his own choices. As the courtroom began to empty, Edmund took her hand gently, guiding her toward the exit. "It is finished," he said softly. "Whatever happens now, the truth has been properly established, and you need never fear encountering him under such circumstances again." "I am grateful," Evelyn said quietly, "though I confess, I feel strangely heavy, even now that justice has been served." "That heaviness will pass with time," Edmund reassured her gently. "You have shown remarkable strength throughout everything, from that terrible night until this very moment." Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, curious onlookers, eager for any final glimpse of the scandal's resolution. Edmund guided Evelyn quickly through them, shielding her from unwanted attention as they made their way toward their waiting carriage. As they settled inside for the journey home, Evelyn finally allowed herself a small measure of relief, the tension of the past several days beginning slowly to ease from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly, turning to face her husband fully, "for everything you have done throughout this entire ordeal." "There is nothing to thank me for," Edmund said gently, taking her hand in his own. "I only did what any husband should do for the woman he loves." Evelyn smiled softly at his words, resting her head against his shoulder as the carriage began its journey back toward the estate they called home, carrying with them the quiet hope that perhaps now, finally, they could begin to leave the events of that terrible night fully behind them. Yet as the carriage rolled steadily along the countryside road, neither of them noticed the figure watching quietly from beside the courthouse steps. A woman dressed in mourning black, her expression unreadable, as she observed their departure with quiet, calculated interest. 3 days after the trial concluded, a letter arrived at the estate, addressed simply to Lady Cambourne, written in careful, formal handwriting. Evelyn opened it cautiously in the privacy of the morning room, her curiosity mixed with a faint sense of unease as she recognized the name signed at the bottom. Beatrice Hale, Reginald's elder sister, whom Evelyn had met only briefly on a handful of occasions over the years, requested a private meeting, expressing a desire to speak with Evelyn directly regarding recent events. Evelyn read the letter twice before setting it down, uncertain how to feel about such an unexpected request. She brought the letter to Edmund later that afternoon, finding him in his study reviewing estate correspondence. "What do you make of this?" she asked, handing him the letter. Edmund read it carefully, his expression thoughtful. "It seems civil enough in tone," he said eventually. "Though given recent events, I understand your hesitation." "I do not know what she wishes to discuss," Evelyn admitted. "Perhaps she seeks to defend her brother, or perhaps she wishes only to apologize on behalf of her family. Would you like me present during such a meeting?" Edmund asked gently. Evelyn considered this for a moment, before shaking her head slowly. "I think, perhaps, it might be better if I speak with her alone. If nothing else, it may bring some manner of closure to this entire matter." Edmund nodded, though his expression remained watchful. "If you feel that is best, I will respect your wish. However, I will remain close by, should you need me." 2 days later, Beatrice Hale arrived at the estate, dressed simply in dark traveling clothes, her expression composed but weary, as she was shown into the drawing room, where Evelyn waited. The two women regarded each other quietly for a moment, before Evelyn gestured toward a nearby chair. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Beatrice said, settling carefully into her seat. "I imagine this visit brings you little comfort, given everything that has occurred." "I confess, I was uncertain what to expect," Evelyn admitted honestly. "Though I appreciate your willingness to speak plainly." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, her hands folding carefully in her lap, before she finally spoke again. "I wish to say, first and foremost, that my family holds no anger toward you regarding what occurred. My brother's actions were entirely his own, and nothing you did could ever justify such behavior." Evelyn felt a small measure of relief at these words, though she remained cautious, sensing there was more Beatrice wished to say. "I have watched my brother's bitterness grow for many years," Beatrice continued quietly. "Long before your marriage, even before your engagement to the Duke was announced, he carried disappointment poorly, allowing it to fester rather than accepting circumstances as they were. I fear, in many ways, our family failed to properly address this flaw within him, before it grew into something far more dangerous. You need not feel responsible for his choices," Evelyn said gently, surprising herself with the sympathy she still felt, despite everything that had happened. "Perhaps not entirely," Beatrice said, "though I cannot help but feel some measure of guilt, having witnessed his growing resentment over the years, without ever properly confronting him about it." The two women sat quietly for a moment, the weight of shared sorrow settling gently between them, despite their different positions within the recent events. "What will happen to him now?" Evelyn asked eventually, curiosity overcoming her earlier hesitation. "He has been sent away," Beatrice said softly, "to a distant relative's estate in the north, where he will remain under close supervision for the duration of his sentence. I do not know if he will ever fully understand the gravity of what he has done, though I hope, in time, some measure of genuine remorse might yet take root within him." "I hope so as well," Evelyn said quietly, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she meant it sincerely. Beatrice studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You are more gracious than I expected, Lady Cambourne, given everything my brother has put you through." "I hold no desire for further suffering on anyone's part," Evelyn said honestly. "I only wished for the truth to be acknowledged properly, and for justice to be served fairly. Beyond that, I find little satisfaction in prolonged bitterness." "That is a rare quality," Beatrice said softly, "particularly given the circumstances." Before she departed, Beatrice paused at the doorway, turning back toward Evelyn one final time. I wish you and the Duke every happiness moving forward, she said sincerely. You deserve peace after everything that has occurred. Thank you, Evelyn said, and meant it fully. As Beatrice's carriage disappeared down the long drive, Edmund appeared quietly beside Evelyn, having waited nearby throughout the entire conversation. How did it go? He asked gently. Better than I expected, Evelyn admitted, a small measure of peace settling over her for the first time in days. I believe we have both found some manner of closure through that conversation. I am glad, Edmund said, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. Perhaps now we can truly begin to move forward from everything that has happened. Evelyn leaned into him gratefully, feeling the last remnants of tension finally beginning to dissolve entirely. The estate around them seemed quieter now, the earlier chaos of scandal and legal proceedings settling gradually into a calmer rhythm, as autumn began slowly transforming the surrounding countryside with rich golden colors. Over the following weeks, life at the estate gradually returned to something resembling normalcy. Evelyn resumed her usual duties, overseeing household matters and reconnecting with friends and neighbors who had initially kept a respectful distance during the height of the scandal. Slowly, the whispers and curious glances began to fade, replaced by genuine warmth and support from those who had witnessed her quiet strength throughout the ordeal. Margaret remained a constant source of comfort, visiting often, while Charlotte continued expressing gratitude that her sister had emerged from such a difficult experience with her spirit largely intact. Edmund, for his part, seemed to grow even more attentive following the events, rarely straying far from Evelyn's side, as though determined never again to be absent should she need him. One evening, as the two of them walked together through the estate's gardens, watching the sun set gently over the distant hills, Evelyn found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that terrible night at the ball. Do you ever think of what might have happened had you not returned early that evening? She asked quietly. Often, Edmund admitted, his expression growing thoughtful. Though I try not to dwell too long on such thoughts. What matters now is that I did return, and that we faced everything together, as we always shall. Evelyn smiled softly, taking his hand as they continued their walk through the quiet garden. I believe, she said gently, that whatever challenges we face in the future, we will face them exactly as we faced this one, together, honestly, and without fear. Edmund squeezed her hand gently in response, and together they continued walking, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the peaceful grounds, offering a quiet promise of brighter days still ahead. Winter arrived quietly that year, blanketing the estate in soft layers of snow that transformed the gardens into a peaceful, glistening landscape. With the passing months, the memory of that difficult night at the ball had gradually settled into something more distant, though never entirely forgotten. Evelyn found herself, more often than not, able to think back on those events, without the sharp sting of fear that had once accompanied such memories. One crisp December morning, Edmund found her in the drawing room, seated near the window, watching snow fall gently outside while she worked on a piece of needlework. He crossed the room quietly and settled beside her. I have been thinking, he said, about hosting another gathering here, before the new year begins. Evelyn glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. Another ball? She asked carefully. Nothing so grand, Edmund reassured her gently, noticing her hesitation. Perhaps a smaller gathering, close friends and family only, a chance to properly celebrate everything we have overcome this past year, together. Evelyn considered this for a long moment, memories of the previous ball inevitably surfacing at the suggestion, yet as she studied her husband's hopeful expression, she found herself slowly warming to the idea. I think, she said finally, that might be exactly what we need. A chance to reclaim such gatherings from the shadow that has lingered over them since that night. Edmund smiled warmly, clearly pleased by her response. Then let us plan it together, he said, exactly as we wish it to be, filled only with warmth and genuine joy. Over the following weeks, Evelyn threw herself into preparations, with renewed enthusiasm, carefully selecting a guest list composed entirely of trusted friends and family, ensuring no shadow from the past could possibly intrude upon this new celebration. Margaret assisted eagerly, while Charlotte offered her usual cheerful energy, helping select decorations and refreshments for the upcoming evening. As the night of the gathering finally arrived, Evelyn found herself standing once more before her mirror, dressed in a gown of deep blue, watching her own reflection with a mixture of nervous anticipation and genuine excitement. Margaret adjusted a final pin in her hair before stepping back with a satisfied smile. "You look radiant," Margaret said warmly. "Truly, Evelyn, you have never appeared more at peace." "I feel different than I did before that other evening," Evelyn admitted, studying her reflection thoughtfully. "Stronger, perhaps, though I confess a small flutter of nervousness remains." "That is only natural," Margaret said gently. "Tonight will be nothing like before. This time, you reclaim these halls entirely, for joy alone." Edmund awaited her at the base of the staircase as she descended, his expression filled with quiet admiration as he watched her approach. "You are breathtaking," he said softly, taking her hand as she reached the final step. "Thank you," Evelyn said, smiling warmly, despite the flutter of nerves still lingering within her chest. "Shall we greet our guests?" The evening unfolded beautifully, filled with laughter, warm conversation, and gentle music drifting pleasantly through halls that had, months earlier, witnessed such painful events. Evelyn moved comfortably among her guests, sharing genuine smiles and heartfelt conversations, feeling gradually more at ease as the night progressed. At one point, as the musicians began a slow, graceful waltz, Edmund appeared beside her, extending his hand with a warm smile. "May I have this dance, my lady?" Evelyn accepted gladly, allowing him to guide her onto the floor, as other couples joined around them. As they moved together through the familiar steps, Evelyn felt a profound sense of healing settle over her, as though this simple, joyful dance somehow began erasing the lingering shadow of that painful night months earlier. "Thank you," she whispered softly as they danced. "For what?" Edmund asked gently. "For giving me this moment," Evelyn said, "for helping me reclaim something that once felt lost to fear." Edmund pulled her slightly closer as they continued their dance. "You reclaimed it yourself, through your own strength," he said softly. "I merely stood beside you, exactly as I always intend to." As the dance concluded, applause rippled gently through the assembled guests, and Edmund, seemingly moved by some sudden inspiration, raised his voice slightly, addressing the gathered crowd. "Friends," he said warmly, "before we continue this wonderful evening, I find myself wishing to say a few words, if you will indulge me." The room quieted attentively, guests turning their full attention toward the Duke as he stood beside his wife, his expression filled with genuine warmth. "Many of you know," he continued, "that this past year has tested us in ways none of us anticipated. Yet through every difficulty, my wife has shown a strength and grace that continues to inspire me daily. Tonight, I wish simply to express my deepest gratitude, not only for her enduring courage, but for the privilege of standing beside her through every challenge we have faced." Evelyn felt tears gathering gently at the corners of her eyes as she listened to her husband's heartfelt words, surrounded by the warm smiles of trusted friends and family. "To my wife," Edmund continued, raising his glass gently toward her, "whose strength continues to humble and inspire me each and every day." The guests raised their glasses warmly in response, murmuring their agreement and admiration, and Evelyn found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had built alongside this remarkable man. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Edmund guided Evelyn quietly toward the same corridor where such painful events had once unfolded. Evelyn hesitated briefly at the entrance, old memories flickering uncomfortably at the edges of her mind. "Are you certain you wish to come this way?" Edmund asked gently, sensing her hesitation. "Yes," Evelyn said firmly, steadying herself. "I think, perhaps, it is time I reclaimed this space fully as well." Together, they walked slowly down the familiar corridor, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating walls that had once witnessed such fear and pain. Evelyn paused near the very spot where the confrontation had occurred, taking a steadying breath as she studied the quiet space around her. "I remember feeling so frightened here," she admitted softly, "so powerless." "You are neither of those things now," Edmund said gently, taking her hand firmly in his own. "You have shown remarkable courage throughout everything that followed that night." Evelyn nodded slowly, feeling a quiet sense of closure settling gently over her as she stood in that once painful space, now filled instead with the comforting presence of her husband beside her. "I believe," she said softly, "that this corridor no longer holds the same power over me it once did." "Good," Edmund said warmly, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Let us return to our guests, then, and continue celebrating everything we have overcome together." They returned to the ballroom together, hand in hand, rejoining the warm celebration that continued late into the night. As the final guests departed and the household gradually settled into quiet stillness once more, Evelyn found herself standing beside Edmund near the same window where she had watched carriages arrive, that fateful evening so many months earlier. "This year has taught me many things," she said softly, gazing out at the snow-covered grounds glistening gently beneath the moonlight. "What has it taught you?" Edmund asked gently. "That true strength often comes not from avoiding difficulty," Evelyn said thoughtfully, "but from facing it honestly, and allowing those who love us to stand beside us through every challenge." Edmund wrapped his arms gently around her from behind, resting his chin softly atop her head, as they both continued gazing out at the peaceful winter landscape. "I could not agree more," he said softly, "and I intend to stand beside you, exactly this way, for every year still ahead of us." Evelyn smiled softly, leaning back gently into his warm embrace, feeling entirely at peace for the first time in what felt like a very long while. Whatever challenges the future might yet hold, she understood now, with quiet certainty, that she would never again face them alone. Years passed gently over the estate, each season bringing its own quiet rhythm of change. Evelyn often found herself reflecting on how far she had come since that difficult night, marveling at how something so painful had ultimately led to a deeper, more resilient bond between herself and Edmund than she could have imagined possible before. Their household grew steadily throughout those years, filled eventually with the laughter of two young children, a daughter named Alice and a son named George, both of whom brought fresh joy and purpose into their lives. Evelyn watched her children grow with quiet pride, teaching them gently about kindness, honesty, and the importance of standing firmly for what was right, lessons she herself had learned so vividly through her own experiences. Margaret remained a beloved presence throughout the years, eventually marrying a kind gentleman from a neighboring estate, though her friendship with Evelyn never wavered, the two women remaining as close as sisters despite the passing of time. Charlotte, too, found happiness eventually, marrying a respected scholar and settling nearby, ensuring the sisters remained close throughout the years that followed. Word occasionally reached Evelyn regarding Reginald, carried through distant relatives or passing acquaintances. She learned, some years later, that he had eventually settled quietly in a distant county, living a modest, solitary existence far removed from the society he had once been so eager to impress. Whether genuine remorse had ever truly taken root within him, Evelyn could not say for certain, though she found herself hoping, in the quiet corners of her heart, that he had eventually found some measure of peace within himself, however different that peace might look from what he had once envisioned for his life. Beatrice, his sister, maintained occasional correspondence with Evelyn over the years, the two women having formed an unexpected but genuine friendship following that difficult conversation shortly after the trial. Their letters spoke of simple, everyday matters, family news, and quiet reflections, a small but meaningful connection that had emerged from such painful circumstances. Edmund's love for Evelyn only deepened as the years progressed, his admiration for her strength and grace growing ever more profound with each passing season. He often told their children stories of their mother's remarkable courage, though he was careful always to frame such stories gently, emphasizing resilience and strength, rather than dwelling upon the painful details of what had actually transpired. One late summer evening, many years after that fateful ball, Evelyn found herself once again standing near the same drawing room window, watching her own children, now playing joyfully in the gardens below, their laughter carrying pleasantly on the warm evening breeze. Edmund joined her quietly, wrapping an arm gently around her waist as they watched together. "Do you remember," he said softly, "how frightened you once felt, standing in this very spot, all those years ago?" "I remember," Evelyn said gently, "though it feels almost like remembering another person entirely, someone far removed from who I have since become." "You have grown remarkably strong," Edmund said warmly, pressing a gentle kiss against her temple. "We have grown together," Evelyn corrected softly, turning to face him fully. "Whatever strength I have found, it has come from knowing you stand beside me, always, through every challenge life presents." Edmund smiled warmly, taking her hand gently in his own, as they continued watching their children play happily below. "I believe," he said thoughtfully, that true strength is never found alone. It grows instead through the support and love we offer one another, especially during our most difficult moments. Evelyn nodded in quiet agreement, resting her head gently against his shoulder as the golden evening light continued casting warm shadows across the peaceful gardens below. Whatever fear and uncertainty that terrible night at the ball had once brought into her life, she understood now, with complete certainty, that it had ultimately led her toward a deeper appreciation of the strength she carried within herself, and the profound love shared between herself and the husband who had stood so faithfully beside her through it all. As their children's laughter continued drifting gently through the evening air, Evelyn found herself filled with a quiet, steady gratitude, not only for the peaceful life they now shared, but for every difficult lesson that had ultimately brought them to this moment of genuine, lasting happiness. Their story, much like countless others touched by hardship and eventual healing, stood as a quiet testament to the enduring power of honesty, courage, and unwavering love, a reminder that even the darkest moments could ultimately give way to brighter days, provided one remained willing to face them honestly, and never alone. And so, as the sun continued its slow descent beyond the distant hills, casting the estate gently into the soft glow of evening, Evelyn and Edmund remained together at that quiet window, watching their children play freely below, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges life might yet bring their way, they would always face them exactly as they had learned to that fateful night so many years before, honestly, courageously, and always together.